The grand golden hall of the royal palace shimmered beneath countless crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across the sea of nobles who had gathered for what was meant to be the most sacred ceremony in the kingdom. Vespera stood there in her simple white gown, heart hammering against her ribs as the fated bond sang. Between her and the tall, imposing Alpha King on the dais. For one breathless moment their eyes met, and Vespera dared to hope. Then his voice rang out deep and commanding, cutting through the expectant silence. I stand before you today to name my queen, the one who will rule at my side. With those words he turned and extended his hand not to her, but to the elegant woman beside him. Lady Alara shall be crowned as my queen and chosen mate. The words struck her like a physical blow. The bond that had once felt warm and alive twisted violently inside her chest, splintering into 1,000 sharp pieces. Gasps and whispers erupted around her, but Vespera heard nothing except the roaring in her ears. Humiliation burned hot across her cheeks, as every eye in the hall turned toward her, the invisible Omega who had dared to dream. Tears blurred her vision, yet Vespera refused to let them fall in front of them. Lifting her chin with the last shred of dignity possessed Vespera turned and fled. Her footsteps echoed loudly as Vespera ran through the massive doors into the cold, stormy night rain. Lashing against her face, mixing with the tears, Vespera could no longer hold back. Which country are you listening from? Please comment below. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. The wind howled around her as Vespera stumbled down the marble steps, her silk slippers soaked through. Vespera did not know where Vespera was running, only that Vespera could not stay there another moment. Behind her the palace lights grew smaller, but the pain in her heart only grew larger, threatening to swallow her whole. What would become of her now that the Alpha King had publicly shattered their bond? The remote monastery nestled high against the jagged cliffs of the Whispering Mountains stood as a silent sentinel wrapped in perpetual mist that softened every edge and muffled every sound. Vespera had stumbled through its heavy wooden gates weeks earlier, her body trembling from the long, desperate journey, her simple white gown still streaked with mud from the stormy night. Vespera had fled the palace. The sisters had welcomed her without questions, offering only a small stone cell, a set of plain gray robes, and the promise of peace in the quiet routines of their order. Now her days unfolded in an invisible rhythm that mirrored the life Vespera had always known, one where Vespera moved through the world unseen and unheard. Each dawn Vespera rose before the sun crested the peaks, joining the nuns in the herb garden where the air carried the sharp scent of rosemary and thyme. Her hands plunged into the cold, damp earth, turning soil, planting seeds, and pulling stubborn weeds, while the wind tugged at her robes like insistent fingers, trying to remind her Vespera still existed. Yet inside her thoughts swirled endlessly around that glittering hall the moment the Alpha King had turned away from her and named another woman his queen. The fated bond still pulled faintly at her chest, a dull, persistent ache that whispered of what had been stolen from her. Why had Vespera ever allowed herself to hope that an Omega like her could stand beside a king? Vespera wondered as her fingers brew Vespera D over delicate lavender stems, careful not to bruise them. The nuns were gentle with her, offering small smiles and soft words of encouragement, but their kindness felt distant, as though Vespera were a shadow they passed through without truly noticing. Sister Elena, a kind-eyed woman with silver strands in her dark hair, would walk beside her during these morning tasks and say, "My child, the mountains teach us that every storm eventually passes, and the goddess sees the quiet hearts most clearly." Vespera would nod, forcing a polite reply of, "Thank you, sister. I am learning to find solace here," while her inner voice cried out that no one had ever truly seen her, not the court, not the king, and not even these devoted women. Meals in the long dining hall were taken in near silence, the only sounds the soft clink of wooden bowls and the occasional murmured prayer. Vespera sat at the far end of the table, spooning thin vegetable broth and breaking dry bread, her eyes fixed on the grain of the wood as conversations flowed around her like a river bypassing a small, unnoticed rock. No one asked about her past or the bond that still lingered in her veins. Vespera felt forgotten, erased from the kingdom below, where the palace towers gleamed in the distance, on clear days mocking her with their unreachable splendor. In the afternoons, Vespera retreated to the scriptorium, where tall Vesperal V's of ancient books reached toward the vaulted ceiling. There Vespera dusted tomes and copied faded texts, her quill moving steadily across fresh parchment, the ink smelling of earth and time. The stories within those pages spoke of omegas who had risen above their silence, but her own tale felt like an unfinny Vespera D sentence cut short by betrayal. The isolation pressed against her like the heavy fog that rolled in every evening, cloaking the monastery in white and making the world beyond disappear. Vespera spent long hours alone in her cell, staring at the rough stone walls, the narrow window framing only clouds and distant peaks. Exhaustion had become her constant companion, and Vespera found herself craving sleep more with each passing day, slipping into it earlier and lingering longer, sometimes drifting off for stretches that felt endless. The bond's faint tug mixed with a deeper weariness, pulling her under like a gentle tide. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in soft hues of rose and gold, Vespera stood at the edge of the cliff path, her gray robes whipping in the wind. The valley stretched below, the kingdom's lights twinkling like indifferent stars. He is there with his chosen queen, Vespera thought, the pain rising fresh and sharp. Mother Superior approached, then her steps quiet on the gravel, her voice warm, yet probing. Child, you have been with us long enough to know our ways, but the weight you carry seems heavier than stone. Would you share what troubles your heart? Vespera turned, her voice barely above a whisper, yet steady. Mother, I thought the bond meant I was chosen, that I mattered beyond the shadows. Instead, I am nothing more than a ghost even here. The elder placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, the touch warm, but unable to reach the cold emptiness inside. The goddess has not forgotten you, even if kings have. But as Vespera returned to her cell that night, the exhaustion pulling her toward her narrow cot, faster than ever, Vespera felt a strange new pull deep within, not from the bond, but from somewhere far older and more mysterious. A whisper brew Vespera D, the edges of her mind promising something Vespera could not yet name, and as her eyes closed, the world faded, leaving only the faint echo of a door creaking open in the dark. The exhaustion that had been building for weeks finally claimed her completely as Vespera lay on the narrow cot in her stone cell, the gray robes folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Her eyes fluttered closed, and the world dissolved into a soft velvet darkness that felt deeper than any sleep Vespera had known before. At first there was only silence, then a faint tug like a silken thread, pulling her forward through layers of mist that parted gently around her. Suddenly Vespera found herself standing barefoot in a sunlit meadow that stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted in hues of lavender and gold. The grass beneath her feet was impossibly soft and vibrant, each blade whispering secrets as it drew Vespera D against her skin. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, their petals glowing with an inner light, and the air carried the sweet scent of honey and fresh rain mixed with the faint herbal notes of the monastery garden. This is not real, Vespera thought, her heart racing with a wild mix of fear and wonder. Where am I, and how did I get here? Vespera took a tentative step forward, and the landscape responded subtly, the grass rippling like water beneath her movement. A gentle breeze carried voices soft and familiar, the voices of the nuns back at the monastery. Vespera realized with a jolt that Vespera was inside someone's dream, walking through it as though it were a living, breathing world Vespera could touch and feel. The realization sent a shiver of awe through her entire body. How is this possible? Vespera had always been the invisible one, the Omega. No one noticed the shadow who moved through palace halls, and now monastery corridors without leaving a trace. Yet here Vespera was stepping into the hidden realms of the mind, where no walls could bar her way, no titles could dismiss her. This gift, this doorway to dreams, felt like the first true thing that belonged only to her, a quiet power awakening after years of silence. Tentatively, Vespera reached out and touched a glowing flower, and it bloomed brighter under her fingertips, releasing a shower of sparkling pollen that danced in the air like tiny stars catching the light of hidden memories. A sense of empowerment stirred within her, warm and steady like the first rays of dawn after the longest night. Vespera wandered further the meadow, giving way to a quiet forest path lined with ancient trees whose leaves shimmered with woven memories. Fla Vespera S of Sister Elena's life appeared in the bark, kindnesses given and received carved like intricate tapestries of light and shadow. It was beautiful and intimate, and Vespera felt a deep respect for the gift that allowed her to witness without intruding, to observe the quiet hearts that had welcomed her without demanding her story. The bond in her chest, the faint remnant of what the Alpha King had shattered, began to pulse stronger. Now a gentle, insistent pull guiding her onward through the trees. The forest opened into a vast chamber unlike anything Vespera had ever seen. Towering walls rose around her, not of cold stone, but of swirling emotions, regret and longing shaped into breathtaking architecture that stole her breath. Rooms branched off endlessly, each one filled with images of a face, her own face, captured in moments of joy and quiet pain. Closed doors lined the corridors, heavy and ornate, their handles glowing faintly as if begging to be turned, yet remaining sealed tight with invisible locks forged from unspoken words. Vespera knew this place instinctively, deep in her bones. It was his dream, the Alpha King's sleeping mind laid bare before her like an open book written in the language of the heart. The bond had led her here not for revenge, but for understanding, a silent journey into the landscape of the man who had humiliated her in front of the kingdom. Vespera walked slowly through the grand hall, her footsteps echoing softly on floors tiled with fragments of their shared past, the glittering ceremony, the public rejection, the rain-soaked flight into the night. Each tile pulsed with raw, unfiltered emotion, waves of doubt and longing that while Vespera d over her like a tide, Vespera could not escape. Why does he dream of me still? Vespera wondered, her inner voice filled with a tangle of sorrow and a tiny fragile spark of hope. The air grew heavier as Vespera approached a large chamber at the center where shadows danced like restless spirits, forming and reforming into shapes of what could have been. A massive throne stood there, empty, yet surrounded by chains of gold that seemed to bind nothing and everything at once, their links etched with the weight of a crown he had placed on another. Vespera stepped closer, drawn by an invisible force, and the shadows coalesced into a figure, the silhouette of the king himself, hunched forward in what looked like profound pain. He did not see her, but his presence filled the space with a deep, aching regret that manifested as crumbling towers in the distant corners of the dream, their stones etched with words of apology he had never spoken aloud. Her heart ached at the sight, the poetic beauty of his inner torment mirroring her own hidden wounds. Yet Vespera remained silent, observing the man who had once been her fated everything, now trapped in the architecture of his remorse. A sudden storm brewed in the dream sky, dark clouds rolling across the vaulted ceiling, lightning cracking like whips of guilt. Vespera felt the danger rising, a nightmare threatening to consume him whole. Without thinking, Vespera moved closer, her voice emerging as a soft whisper, carried on the wind like a secret meant only for him. "Your Majesty, the storm is not your only truth." The words slipped out before Vespera could stop them, and the entire dreamscape trembled in response. The towers shuddering, the closed doors rattling on their hinges. His silhouette turned toward the sound, eyes wide with sudden shock, as if hearing her from across an impossible divide. The storm intensified, thunder rolling closer, and Vespera realized with a rush of fear and exhilaration that this connection might wake him at any moment, breaking the fragile thread that had drawn her here and leaving her with more questions than answers about the power now blooming inside her and the king whose dreams now held pieces of her own destiny. The faint light of dawn crept through the narrow window of her stone cell, painting the rough walls in soft shades of gray and gold as Vespera jolted awake, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for release. The dream still clung to her skin, a vivid echo of towering regret and closed doors in the Alpha King's sleeping mind, but now it mixed with a deeper, colder wave of memory that rose unbidden, threatening to pull her under once more. Vespera sat up slowly, drawing the thin blanket around her shoulders, her fingers trembling as they clutched the fabric the same way they had clutched her dignity on so many nights before. Why does this gift show me as pain when my own still feels like fresh wounds? Vespera thought, the inner voice laced with a quiet fear that had lived inside her for years. The monastery was silent except for the distant call of morning bells, yet in her mind the past unfolded like scenes from a forbidden play, each one more painful than the last. Vespera closed her eyes, and the first flashback pulled her back to the small village of her childhood where the air always smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Vespera had been only 14 and Omega, born into a family that viewed her as little more than a bargaining chip for alliances. Her father, a stern beta merchant, had paraded her before visiting alphas during harvest festivals, his voice booming with false pride while Vespera stood silent in a threadbare dress, eyes fixed on the ground. One alpha, a burly trader with cold eyes, had laughed openly when the faint scent of her budding bond drifted toward him. This one, a worthless shadow, no true spark for any worthy mate, he had declared before turning away and choosing her younger sister instead. The humiliation had burned then just as it burned now, but Vespera had swallowed it down, learning early that silence was her only shield. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes in the present as the memory shifted to the royal court, where Vespera had first been summoned years later after her hidden lineage as a rare bonded Omega was discovered. The palace corridors had gleamed with marble and gold, yet Vespera moved through them like a ghost, her simple gowns marking her as lesser among the glittering nobles. An older advisor had cornered her one evening in a shadowed alcove, his breath heavy with wine as he sneered that Omegas like her existed only to serve and disappear, never to stand beside power. When Vespera dared to whisper a protest, his hand had gripped her arm hard enough to bruise the pain, a sharp reminder of her place. Vespera had fled to her tiny assigned chamber that night, curling into herself while the bond first stirred faintly in her chest, a warm promise that someone somewhere might see her true worth. That promise had led her straight to the Alpha King and the ceremony that shattered everything. The betrayal cut so deep because it echoed every rejection, every abuse that had taught her Vespera was invisible, unworthy of being chosen. He had looked at her in private moments, his eyes softening with what Vespera foolishly believed was genuine affection, the fated bond humming between them like a living melody. Yet in front of the kingdom he had turned away, crowning another as if their connection had been nothing more than a fleeting shadow to be discarded for political gain. The fear now rooted in her heart was not just of him, but of the bond itself, the terrifying possibility that trusting it again would only lead to more pain, more silence, more erasure. Vespera rose from the cot and paced the small cell, her bare feet cold against the stone floor, the gray robes whispering around her ankles like forgotten secrets. Sister Elena found her there moments later, the kind-eyed nun carrying a steaming mug of herbal tea that smelled of chamomile and hope. "Child, you look as though the mountains themselves have settled upon your shoulders," the sister said, softly setting the mug on the wooden table and reaching out with gentle hands to steady her. Vespera took the tea, her voice breaking as Vespera replied, "I carry more than mountains, sister. I carry every time I was told I was nothing, every hand that piu Vespera d me aside, every promise of belonging that turned to dust. The bond was my last fragile light, and he extinguished Vespera d it publicly, as if I never mattered. The nun listened, her expression filled with quiet empathy, yet the words that followed offered no easy comfort. The goddess weaves even our darkest threads into something stronger, but only if we allow the light to enter. Vespera nodded, forcing a small smile, while inside her thoughts raced with the weight of trauma that had shaped her into the silent woman Vespera had become. The flashbacks lingered like storm clouds, refusing to dissipate the village laughter, the court bruises, the king's final rejection, all blending into a tapestry of fear that warned her against the pull Vespera still felt toward his dreams. As the morning light grew stronger, Vespera felt a new tug in her chest, sharper, now the bond stirring with an urgency that made her breath catch. It was not just memory calling her, but something alive, a distant cry from the king's waking world that threatened to draw her back into his sleeping mind, whether Vespera was ready or not. Vespera set the mug down, untouched, her hands clenching at her sides as the fear and the strange new power warred within her, knowing that one more step into those dream corridors could either heal her scars or reopen them forever, leaving her standing on the edge of a choice that might change everything. The sharp tug in her chest came without warning, slicing through the quiet rhythm of the monastery afternoon like a blade forged from starlight and shadow. Vespera had been kneeling in the herb garden, her hands buried in the cool dark soil, fingers gently coaxing tender shoots from the earth, when the bond flared to life with an urgency that stole her breath. The Alpha King was in danger. Vespera knew it instinctively, the faint remnant of their shattered connection now pulsing like a living heartbeat, warning her across the miles that separated them. Political winds had turned treacherous. Vespera sensed it in the way the pull twisted, heavy with the metallic taste of betrayal and steel. Armies loyal to rival houses were gathering at the kingdom's borders, fueled by whispers that the king's broken bond had weakened his rule, made him vulnerable to those who sought to seize the throne. Vespera rose slowly, brushing dirt from her gray robes, her heart racing as the wind whipped through the mountain pass, carrying distant echoes of thunder that mirrored the storm brewing in his world. Why does the bond call me now? Vespera wondered, her inner voice a swirl of fear and newfound strength. I fled his betrayal, I built walls of silence and stone, yet this power, this gift of dreams, refuses to let me remain invisible. It demands that I step forward, not as the humiliated Omega, but as the one who can walk where no one else can. The decision formed within her like dawn breaking over jagged peaks, intentional and resolute for the first time since the ceremony. Vespera would enter his dream not by accident, but by choice, guided by the thread that still bound them. Slipping away from the garden, Vespera moved through the cloisters, her footsteps silent on ancient stone, until Vespera reached her small cell, the heavy wooden door closing softly behind her. The narrow cot welcomed her like an old friend, and Vespera lay down, robes still dusted with earth, eyes closing as exhaustion from the long days blended with the deliberate pull of the bond. Sleep claimed her swiftly, this time the velvet darkness parting like curtains on a grand stage. Vespera stepped forward through the mist, her bare feet meeting not the meadow of before, but a vast, turbulent landscape that stretched into shadowed horizons. The air here tasted of smoke and steel, the sky above a roiling canvas of bruised purple and crimson, clouds racing like war banners unfurled. Towering walls of regret still stood in the distance, their stones etched with her face now cracked and trembling under the weight of new threats, crumbling towers leaning precariously as if the king's mind itself was under siege. Vespera walked with purpose, the dream responding to her presence, the ground beneath her shifting. From soft grass to hard-packed earth, scarred by the imprint of marching boots and fallen standards. Cinematic visions unfolded around her, armies clashing in the far valleys, their banners snapping in An invisible wind, while in the center a grand throne room manifested its golden pillars, now wrapped in thorny vines of doubt and political intrigue. Vespera could see the Alpha King there in the dream's heart, his tall frame hunched over a war table. Maps glowing with ominous red lines that represented enemies closing in from every border. His face, etched with exhaustion and unspoken remorse, carried the same architecture of closed doors Vespera had glimpsed before, but now those doors rattled violently, as if the peril outside his mind threatened to shatter everything he had built. Her breath caught at the sight, the cinematic beauty of his inner turmoil blending with the raw danger that pulsed through the landscape like a living heartbeat. "He does not know I am here," Vespera thought, her inner voice steady with quiet empowerment. "I am no longer the shadow he discarded. I am the unseen guardian walking through the very fabric of his fears." The bond sang stronger now, guiding her closer, until Vespera stood just beyond the edge of the war table, her form invisible to him, yet present in every ripple of the dream air. Whispers of conspiracy echoed from the shadows, voices of nobles and generals plotting to exploit the broken bond, to declare the king unfit, to name a new ruler and divide the kingdom among themselves. Vespera felt the weight of it all, the political storm that could topple his reign, the military threats that loomed like dark mountains on the horizon. A sudden gust tore through the dream, tearing at the maps and scattering glowing embers that burned like warnings of fire and blood to come. Vespera moved instinctively, reaching out not with hands, but with the gentle power of her gift. Calming a flickering lantern on the table, its flame steadying under her unseen influence, as if her presence alone whispered peace into the chaos. Emotional dialogue formed in her mind, words Vespera longed to speak aloud, yet held back for now. Knowing the slow burn of their reconnection demanded patience. "You turned from me in the light of day, my king, yet here in the shadows of sleep I see the man. Beneath the crown, the one who carries regret as heavy as any crown. I will not let this danger claim you, not while I have the power to walk these paths and remind you that even the powerless can become the unseen force that changes everything." The king's silhouette straightened slightly, as if sensing a shift in the air, his eyes scanning the dream chamber with sudden intensity, though he could not yet see her. The peril intensified, then a massive shadow rising on the dream's horizon, shaped like an invading army cresting a hill, their swords drawn and banners bearing the sigils of houses long opposed to his rule. Vespera felt the pull deepen the bond, urging her to act more boldly as the landscape trembled, the closed doors beginning to splinter under the pressure. Her heart swelled with a fierce protective strength, the journey from monastery silence to this moment of intentional power filling her with an empowering light that pu Vespera d back against the gathering storm. Yet as the shadow army surged closer, and the king's form tensed ready to fight an invisible battle, Vespera realized with a jolt that her presence had been noticed not just by the dream but by something deeper, the bond itself awakening fully and threatening to pull him from sleep at any moment. A single word formed on the wind, her whisper, carried like a secret meant only for his ears. "Hold on." The entire dreamscape quivered in response, the towers of regret leaning dangerously, the war table cracking down the center, and Vespera knew in that instant that crossing this line intentionally had ignited a connection far more powerful than Vespera had anticipated, one that could either save him or force them both into a reckoning neither was fully prepared to face. The dreamscape stabilized under her feet, yet the air still hummed with the aftershock of her whispered warning, the vast chamber trembling like a living heart that had just been startled awake. Vespera stood motionless for a moment, her gray robes from the monastery now shimmering faintly within the dream, as if the fabric itself had absorbed the moonlight of his regret. The bond pulled her deeper, urging her forward into the corridors Vespera had only glimpsed before. And Vespera obeyed, not with fear, but with a quiet, resolute strength that bloomed warmer in her chest with every step. This is his inner world, Vespera, thought her inner voice steady and empowering the invisible Omega No longer hiding but walking boldly through the architecture of the man who once cast her aside. I see you now, my king, every locked door, every crumbling tower, every room built from memories of me. The landscape unfolded cinematically around her, the grand hall, giving way to endless branching pathways where walls rose like living sculptures forged from emotion and shadow. Towering columns of regret twisted upward, their surfaces etched with her face captured in countless moments, the soft curve of her smile during a stolen garden conversation, the quiet pain in her eyes. On the night he had first turned away in private, before the public ceremony shattered everything. Vespera reached out, her fingertips brushing one such column, and it pulsed beneath her touch, releasing a cascade of golden light that illuminated the path ahead like lanterns kindled by truth itself. The air carried the faint scent of rain and palace incense mixed with the sharp edge of Vespera tears, a sensory tapestry that made the dream feel more real than the stone cell Vespera had left behind. Closed doors lined every corridor, heavy oak and iron adorned with intricate carvings of crowns and broken chains, their handles glowing with an inner fire that begged to be turned yet resisted every attempt, as if the weight of his pride and political fear had sealed them forever. Vespera paused before one such door, her heart aching with a complex weave of sorrow and newfound power. Why do you keep these memories locked away? Vespera whispered, her voice soft, yet carrying through the dream like a gentle wind through ancient trees. Welcome back to the Alpha King Rain channel. Today I'm bringing you a brand new and incredibly captivating story that will surely enthrall you if you listen to the whole video. The story is entirely fictional. The video is created using AI, and it's designed to provide value, entertainment, and positive education for viewers aged 13 and up. Now, let's dive into today's story. I was never invisible to you, not truly. The bond knew it even when your crown demanded otherwise. The door rattled in response, its hinges creaking, as if her words had loosened something deep within. The architecture yet it held firm, leaving her to continue onward, the path widening into a vast chamber that stole her breath with its haunting beauty. Here the regret had manifested as an entire city of rooms stacked like impossible palaces, each one dedicated to a different fragment of what could have been. One chamber glowed with the soft light of a wedding that never happened, silk banners of their shared house colors fluttering in an unseen breeze, while another lay in ruins, its floor littered with shattered glass that reflected her running away into the stormy night. Vespera walked through them slowly, her bare feet stepping over tiles that shifted from warm marble to cold rain slick stone, each surface echoing with the emotional weight of his remorse. Cinematic visions played across the walls, the grand ceremony replaying in slow motion, his hand extending not to her, but to Lady Alara, the crowd's gasps, the way her own heart had splintered in public view. Yet in these rooms the dream did not stop at the betrayal, it lingered on the aftermath, showing him alone in his royal chambers, pacing the floors, his tall frame shadowed by candlelight, his face etched with lines of exhaustion Vespera had never seen in waking life. He carries this every night, Vespera realized, her inner thoughts filling with a quiet empathy that surprised even her. The Alpha King who stood so tall before the kingdom crumbles here in silence, building entire worlds from the mistake that haunts him. The bond hummed stronger now, a warm current that connected her presence to the very fabric of the dream, allowing her to feel echoes of his emotions, raw and unfiltered waves of regret, so vast they had become the foundation stones beneath her feet. Vespera moved to the center of the chamber, where a single massive room stood apart, its doors slightly ajar for the first time, revealing an interior bathed in soft dawn light. Inside, Vespera saw herself not as the humiliated figure from the ceremony, but as a queen radiant and powerful standing beside him on a balcony, overlooking a kingdom transformed by equality and voice. The vision made her breath catch the empowering image of her own potential reflected back at her through his deepest longing. "Is this what you dream of when the world sleeps?" Vespera murmured, her voice carrying emotional weight, laced with the slow burn of understanding rather than anger. "I came here not for revenge, but to see the man beneath the crown, the one who feels the bond as deeply as I do even after everything." The architecture responded subtly, the closed doors along the corridors beginning to glow brighter, their locks shimmering as if her words were keys forged from light and forgiveness. Yet the landscape was not entirely peaceful. Shadows stirred in the far corners were political. Threats from the previous dream still lingered, dark tendrils creeping like vines toward the heart of his regret, ready to choke the fragile beauty Vespera had uncovered. Vespera felt the danger building again, the bond urging her closer to the central room where his silhouette now appeared more clearly, hunched over a table scattered with letters of apology he had written but never sent. Her steps quickened the cinematic sweep of the dream, pulling her into a moment of intimate connection, the air growing thick with unspoken possibilities. Vespera reached the threshold, her hand hovering near the door, ready to push it open fully when a sudden tremor shook the entire dreamscape, the towers of regret leaning dangerously, the golden light fracturing into shards that rained down like falling stars. The king's form straightened sharply, his eyes scanning the chamber with sudden piercing awareness, as if her presence had finally crossed an invisible line, pulling him toward waking consciousness. Vespera froze, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration, realizing that one more whisper, one more step into the core of his remorse might shatter the dream entirely, forcing a confrontation neither of them had yet earned in the slow burn of their reconnection. The shadows surged closer, the political storm from outside bleeding into his mind, and Vespera knew, in that heart-stopping instant, that her silent observation had awakened something far greater, a force that could either heal the kingdom or tear their fragile bond apart, forever leaving her standing alone once more on the edge of invisibility and power. The shadows surged like a living tide, swallowing the golden light of the dream chamber walls, cracking and splintering as the political storm from the outer world bled fully into the heart of his regret. Vespera stood at the threshold of the central room, her hand still hovering near the ajar door, her gray robes shimmering with the faint power of her gift as the entire landscape trembled beneath her bare feet. The cinematic horror unfolded around her, the towering columns of etched memories toppling in slow motion, their surfaces shattering into fragments of her own face that scattered like fallen leaves across the floor. The air thickened with the acrid scent of smoke and impending battle, the closed doors now bursting open one by one, releasing torrents of unspoken apologies that swirled into a chaotic vortex threatening to consume everything. Vespera felt the nightmare cresting, a massive wave of darkness rising from the far horizon, shaped like invading armies, their banners snapping with malicious intent as they marched straight toward the throne room at the dream's core. The Alpha King's silhouette inside the chamber hunched lower over the table of unsent letters, his tall frame shaking as the weight of guilt and peril pressed down upon him like an invisible crown of thorns. "This is it," Vespera thought, her inner voice rising with fierce determination, "the moment where my silence ends and my power begins. I will not watch him drown in the architecture of his own mistakes, not when the bond calls me to be the light that pulls him back." Vespera stepped fully into the room, the dream responding to her presence, the floor steadying slightly under her, as if her very will had become an anchor in the storm. The shadows clawed closer, now forming monstrous shapes that whispered accusations of weakness and betrayal, the political rivals manifesting as spectral figures, circling the king with blades of doubt drawn and ready to strike. His breathing grew ragged in the dream, even as his real body lay somewhere in the distant palace chambers, vulnerable and alone. Vespera moved closer, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and empowering resolve, the slow burn of their connection demanding Vespera act not with anger, but with the quiet strength Vespera had discovered in the monastery's silence. The bond hummed like a melody of stars, guiding her every step until Vespera stood directly beside his shadowed form, close enough to feel the heat of his regret radiating like embers from a dying fire. The nightmare peaked, then the vortex tightening into a suffocating coil around him, the ground splitting open to reveal abyssal depths filled with visions of a kingdom lost to chaos because of the broken bond. Vespera could see the cinematic terror in every detail, the armies breaching the palace gates, the nobles turning on him, the crown tumbling from his head into the void, all because he had chosen politics over the one fated to stand beside him. Her own face appeared in the abyss, not as the humiliated girl from the ceremony, but as a queen who could have saved them all, her eyes filled with the voice Vespera had never been allowed to use. "No, Vespera," whispered her voice, emerging soft, yet carrying the weight of every unspoken truth, the power of her gift infusing the words with a gentle force that rippled outward like a calming wave across the turbulent dreamscape. The shadows recoiled slightly, the vortex slowing as her presence pu Vespera d back against the darkness. Vespera leaned closer, her breath brushing the air. Near his ear, the emotional dialogue forming from the depths of her empowered heart. "You are more than this storm, my king, more than the mistakes that built these walls. I see the man who dreams of redemption, the one who carries my face in every locked room. Let me be the whisper that reminds you light still exists, even in the deepest night." His silhouette stirred, the first sign of awareness crossing his features as the nightmare fought. Heart of the ground shaking violently, now threatening to pull them both under. Vespera knew the moment had come, the high stakes of the dream demanding her final act of salvation. With a steadying breath, Vespera placed her hand lightly on the dream version of his shoulder, the touch sending a spark through the bond that illuminated the chamber in a burst of soft golden light. Then Vespera spoke his true name, the one reserved for private moments, the one that had once made the fated connection sing between them. "Thorne," Vespera whispered the sound, carrying like a lifeline woven from starlight and courage. "Wake from this nightmare, Thorne. Come back to the world where choices can still be remade." The effect was immediate and cinematic, the entire dreamscape convulsing as if struck by lightning. The shadows shattering into harmless mist, the crumbling towers righting themselves, the closed doors swinging wide open to flood the rooms with dawn light. His form straightened sharply, his eyes snapping open within the dream, locking onto her visible presence for the first time, the shock and recognition blazing across his face like the first rays of true dawn. In that frozen instant, Vespera saw the depth of his regret, the man beneath the crown reaching out toward her with a hand that trembled not with fear, but with a longing earned through nights of silent torment. Yet the dream could not hold the connection any longer, the bonds awakening, pulling him relentlessly toward the waking world. Vespera felt the tug in her own chest, the monastery cell calling her back as the landscape began to dissolve around them, the golden light fracturing into particles that danced like fireflies on the wind. His lips moved, forming words Vespera could not yet hear, but the emotional weight of them hung heavy. In the air, a bridge being built across the divide of betrayal and power. As the dream faded completely, Vespera heard his voice echo one final time, raw and desperate, carrying from the dream into reality. The monastery cell returned to her in a rush of cool stone and faint herbal scents, her eyes flying open as Vespera sat up on the narrow cot, her heart thundering with the aftershocks of what Vespera had done. Far away in the royal palace, the Alpha King jolted awake in his grand chambers, the silk Vespera ets tangled around his legs, his chest heaving as sweat glistened on his brow. The nightmare's grip released him, but her whisper lingered like a brand upon his soul, and in that Moment of raw awakening, he threw back his head and screamed her title into the empty room, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings with a force that shattered the silence of the night. Elara, no wait, it is you, my true queen, the one I betrayed. The guards burst through the doors moments later, their faces pale with alarm, but he waved them away, his voice breaking as he repeated her name like a prayer of redemption, the weight of his mistake crashing down upon him fully for the first time in the harsh light of day. Back in her cell, Vespera pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the bond flare brighter than ever, the mini cliffhanger of their connection now hanging in the balance, knowing that her whisper had crossed an irreversible line, pulling them both toward a reckoning where regret could either heal or destroy everything they had left to rebuild. The first light of dawn filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of the royal bedchamber painting, the room in muted tones of amber, and rose as the Alpha King Thorne sat bolt upright in his massive bed, his chest heaving with the remnants of the dream that had felt far too real. His voice still echoed in his own ears, raw and broken from the scream that had torn from his throat. In the dead of night, Elara, no wait, it is you, my true queen, the one I betrayed. The guards had come running, their faces pale with alarm, but he had sent them away with a sharp command, his hands trembling as he pressed them against his temples, trying to steady the whirlwind inside his mind. It was her. He knew it in the deepest part of his soul, the whisper that had pulled him from the nightmare had carried her essence, the soft cadence of her voice that he had tried so hard to forget, yet could never erase. Someone had walked inside his dreams. Not just any presence, but her, the Omega he had publicly rejected and humiliated in front of the entire kingdom. How was this possible? He thought, his inner voice a storm of shock, regret, and dawning realization. The bond one shattered it publicly for the sake of political stability, for the alliance with Lady Elara's powerful house. Yet the connection still lives, and now Vespera walks through my mind like a ghost made of starlight and quiet strength. He rose from the bed, his tall frame moving with restless energy, pacing the cold marble floor in nothing but loose sleeping trousers, the cool air raising goosebumps on his skin that matched the chill of guilt settling deeper in his chest. Every night for weeks the dreams had tormented him, rooms built from her face, closed doors he could never open, towers of regret that grew taller with each passing day. But last night had been different. Vespera had been there not as a passive memory, but as an active presence, her whisper cutting through the darkness like a blade of mercy, saving him from the abyss of political nightmares that threatened to swallow his kingdom whole. Thorne stopped before the tall, arched window overlooking the kingdom, his hands gripping the stone sill until his knuckles turned white. I called her my true queen, he whispered to the empty room, the words tasting both bitter and right on his tongue. The mistake I made that day in the grand hall weighs heavier than any crown. I chose power and alliance over the bond, the one thing the goddess herself had gifted me. And now, Vespera has found a way to reach me across the distance, a power I never knew Vespera possessed. His regret manifested physically, the architecture of his waking thoughts mirroring the dream world. Closed doors in his mind beginning to rattle as questions flooded him relentlessly. Who had taught her this gift? How long had Vespera been walking through his dreams, observing the wreckage he had created? The thought both terrified and strangely comforted him, knowing that even in her silence, Vespera had chosen not to seek revenge, but to pull him from the edge. Far away in the remote monastery, Vespera lay on her narrow cot, her breath coming in shallow waves as the bond flared brighter than it had since the ceremony, sending ripples of his awakening through her entire being. Vespera felt his shock, his dawning realization, like a warm current washing over the cold stone walls of her cell. He knows Vespera thought her inner voice a mix of fear and quiet empowerment. The Alpha King finally understands that I was there inside his most vulnerable moments. The invisible Omega he discarded has become the one who walks through his dreams and saves him from his own darkness. Vespera sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her chest where the bond pulsed with new life, the faint thread strengthening into something more tangible, more insistent. The power of her gift hummed beneath her skin, a quiet force that made her feel seen for the first time, not as a shadow, but as a woman with purpose. Yet the slow burn of their reconnection filled her with both hope and caution. What would he do now that the revelation had begun? Would he seek her out or push her further away, fearing the power Vespera now held? In the palace, Thorne turned from the window, his eyes burning with determination mixed with deep remorse. He moved to his writing desk, the surface still scattered with unsent letters addressed to her, each one more honest than the last. He picked up the quill, his hand hovering over fresh parchment, the words forming in his mind before he could stop them. I felt you last night in the storm of my dreams. Your voice saved me from the abyss I created with my own hands. Tell me how this is possible, my fated one. Tell me how I can begin to mend what I broke so publicly. He did not write the letter, yet the emotion behind it burned through the bond, reaching her across the mountains like a silent plea wrapped in regret. Vespera felt it then, the emotional tug so strong it made her stand and walk to the small window of her cell overlooking the misty peaks. The king was questioning everything now, his regret transforming from passive architecture into active searching, the first step in a revelation that could either heal their shattered bond or ignite new conflicts within the kingdom. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the monastery grounds, Vespera closed her eyes and allowed herself to slip towards sleep, once more drawn by the bond that refused to stay silent. The dream realm called to her again, but this time Vespera sensed him waiting on the other side, not as the distant king, but as a man stripped of his crown, searching desperately for answers in the landscape of his own heart. The revelation had truly begun, and with it came the delicate, fragile threads of a slow burn. Reconnection that would test both their strengths in ways neither could yet imagine, leaving her standing on the precipice of a choice that might change the fate of the entire kingdom. The palace corridors stretched like endless veins of Vespera marble and gilded tapestries. Under the weight of the midday sun, yet the Alpha King Thorne moved through them as if the very air had grown thick with chains of his own making. He had not slept again since the scream tore from his throat the night before, his body refusing rest, while his mind replayed every fragment of the dream with merciless clarity. Vespera had been there, walking through the architecture of his regret, her whisper pulling him from the abyss like a lifeline spun from starlight and quiet courage. Now alone in his private study, the heavy oak doors sealed against the world, he stood before the tall mirror that reflected a man he barely recognized, tall and imposing in his royal robes, yet hollowed by the storm raging behind his eyes. How could I have done it, he thought, the inner voice cracking like thunder through the depths of his soul, the words he had never allowed himself to voice aloud now flooding every corner of his being. In that grand hall with the kingdom watching, I turned from her, the one the goddess had chosen, the fated bond humming between us like a living melody of destiny. I named Lady Alara queen for the sake of alliances, for the fragile peace that political marriages promised, but in doing so I shattered the only true power I possessed. The reflection in the mirror seemed to mock him, his broad shoulders slumping under the invisible crown of guilt, his strong jaw clenched against the wave of remorse that Vespera over him again and again. He remembered the moment with cinematic precision, the way her eyes had met his across the dais, filled with hope and trust, the faint glow of the bond lighting her face like dawn breaking over the mountains. Then his voice had rung out cold and commanding, extending his hand, not to the woman bound to him by fate, but to another chosen for strategy and nothing more. The gasps of the nobles, the way her small frame had trembled before Vespera fled into the stormy night, those images had haunted his waking hours, and now they lived inside his dreams as rooms built from her pane closed doors he could never force open. I saw her as invisible, he confessed silently to the empty room, his fists clenching at his sides, the regret so vast it manifested as a physical ache in his chest. An omega born into silence, raised in shadows, I convinced myself that crowning her would weaken my rule, that the kingdom needed strength through alliances, not the quiet power of a fated mate. What a fool I was, what a blind, arrogant king who traded heart for throne, and left her to carry the weight of my betrayal alone. Tears he had not Vespera D since boyhood burned at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them back, forcing himself to face the truth that had been building like the towers in his sleeping mind. Every night since the ceremony, the dreams had shown him the cost rooms filled with her face, corridors echoing with the sound of her footsteps, fleeing the palace, the crumbling architecture of a future he had destroyed. Yet last night Vespera had not watched from the shadows. Vespera had stepped forward, her voice soft, yet carrying the force of stars, whispering his name and saving him from the nightmare of invasion and loss. Vespera possesses a gift I never knew existed, he marveled, beyond mixing with deeper remorse. Vespera could have used it for revenge, walked through my mind, and torn down every defense instead. Vespera chose mercy, Vespera chose to pull me back. The bond that I publicly denied still lives between us, pulsing now like a second heartbeat, calling me to account for every word, every choice that silenced her. He turned from the mirror, pacing the length of the study, his boots echoing on the stone floor like accusations he could no longer outrun. Flashbacks assaulted him unbidden, the private moments before the ceremony when he had held her hand. In the royal gardens, the bond singing between them, warm and alive with promise. Vespera had looked up at him with those eyes full of quiet strength and whispered that Vespera feared being invisible forever, and he had promised with all the conviction of a king that Vespera would never be unseen again. Then politics had whispered louder, the advisors warning of unrest, the rival houses demanding alliances through marriage, and he had chosen the crown over the bond. The mistake burns deeper than any wound, he thought, his inner voice breaking with raw emotion. I humiliated her before the kingdom, stripped her of voice and dignity, all while the goddess watched and the bond screamed in protest. Now Vespera walks my dreams, not as the broken omega I left behind, but as a woman awakening to power. A force that could reshape everything I built on lies. He stopped at the window overlooking the kingdom, the spires of the city gleaming in the distance, yet the political threats from the borders loomed like dark clouds on the horizon. Letters from generals warned of armies gathering, exploiting the broken bond as proof of his weakness. Whispers spreading that a king who rejected his fated mate could not hold the throne. The regret transformed inside him, becoming a fierce resolve not just to atone, but to seek her out, to cross the mountains and stand before her not as the betrayer, but as the man stripped bare by truth. I must find her, he vowed aloud, his voice rough with emotion, the words carrying through the bond like a plea wrapped in starlight. My true queen, the one I cast aside in the light of day, I see you now in every locked room of my heart. Forgive me not with words, but with the chance to rebuild what I shattered. Far across the peaks in her monastery cell, Vespera felt the surge of his remorse washing over her. Like a warm tide, her own heart responding with a mix of cautious hope and empowering clarity. The Alpha King was breaking open his deep internal storm, finally exposing the man beneath the crown. And the slow burn of their reconnection flickered brighter, threatening to draw them together across the distance in a way that could either heal the kingdom or ignite the very conflicts he feared. Yet as his resolve hardened in the palace, a new shadow stirred on the horizon, a messenger arriving with urgent news of rebellion tied directly to the public betrayal, news that would force him to act before the revelation could fully bloom, leaving their fragile thread hanging on the edge of a choice that might save or doom them both forever. The monastery cell felt smaller than ever as the pull of the bond drew her under once more, the cool stone walls fading into the velvet mist of the dream realm, where fragile threads of connection began to weave themselves like silver moonlight on still water. Vespera stepped forward barefoot into a landscape that had softened since the last storm. The towering columns of regret, now bathed in a gentle dawn, glow, their surfaces etched with her face no longer cracked but shimmering with tentative hope. The air carried the faint scent of wildflowers and distant rain, the kind that promised renewal rather than destruction, and Vespera moved through it with a quiet grace, her gray robes flowing like mist around her ankles. This is different, Vespera, thought her inner voice, steady with a warmth Vespera had not allowed herself to feel since the ceremony. He is waiting not as the distant king, but as a man reaching out across the divide I once believed was unbreakable. The bond hummed softly between them, a living melody that guided her steps toward the central chamber, where the doors stood open wide for the first time, inviting rather than resisting. Vespera crossed the threshold, and there he was, the Alpha King Thorne, standing in the center of the room, his tall frame stripped of royal robes, dressed only in simple linen that made him look more human, more vulnerable than the imposing figure who had stood on the dais. His eyes met hers across the soft golden light, the regret in them deep and raw, yet tempered now with something new, a fragile spark of admiration that sent a quiet thrill through her chest. "You came back," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion, carrying through the dream like a caress woven from starlight and sincerity. "I felt you last night, your whisper saved me from the abyss, and now I stand here knowing it was you walking through the wreckage I created." Vespera paused a few feet away, her heart pounding with the slow burn of reconnection, the empowering knowledge that her presence held power here in his most guarded world. "I did not come for revenge, your majesty," Vespera replied, her words soft, yet carrying the weight of every silent year Vespera had endured. "I came because the bond still sings even after the public shattering, and because I have discovered a gift that lets me walk where no one else can see." The landscape responded to her voice, the floor beneath them blooming with delicate flowers that glowed in hues of lavender and gold, each petal a quiet testament to the strength Vespera had found in the monastery shadows. He took a tentative step closer, his hands open at his sides, as if afraid any sudden movement might make her vanish. "I have spent every night since the ceremony building these rooms from my mistakes," he confessed, the deep internal ache in his tone making the air shimmer with honesty. "Closed doors filled with apologies. I was too proud to speak, towers of regret that grew taller with every dawn. I told myself the alliance with Lady Alara would strengthen the kingdom, that crowning in Omega would invite weakness, but the truth is I feared the power you held over me, the way your quiet presence made me question everything I thought a king should be." Vespera felt the words settle inside her, not as wounds reopening, but as bridges forming, fragile yet real, the slow burn of romance kindling like embers in a hearth carefully tended. "You saw me as invisible," Vespera said, her voice gaining strength with each syllable, the empowering journey from silenced shadow to dream walker filling her with light. "In the palace halls, and even here in your mind, I was the Omega who existed only to serve and disappear. Yet this gift, the ability to walk through dreams like living landscapes, has shown me that silence can become voice, that the powerless can step into the heart of power and whisper truths no crown can silence." He reached out slowly, his fingers hovering near hers, not quite touching the dream air between them, crackling with unspoken possibility. "Tell me how it feels," Vespera continued, her inner thoughts swirling with cautious hope as Vespera allowed the connection to deepen. "To have the woman you rejected stand inside your most private regrets and offer not judgment, but understanding." His eyes softened, the cinematic beauty of the moment unfolding as the chamber walls rippled with memories of their shared past, the stolen garden conversations, the first stirring of the bond before politics had torn it apart. It feels like redemption, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, the Alpha King stripped bare in this space where titles meant nothing. I see you now not as the shadow I discarded, but as the light that walks through my darkness. Your presence here empowers me to face the mistakes I made, the public betrayal that haunts every corner of this dream. I was wrong to choose alliance over fate, to humiliate you before the kingdom when you were the one chosen by the goddess herself. Vespera let his words wash over her, the slow burn warming her from within as Vespera took one small step closer, their hands finally brushing in the dream a spark of connection that sent gentle waves through the entire landscape, the flowers blooming brighter, the closed doors swinging wider to reveal rooms filled with possibilities instead of pain. The bond sang louder, now a harmonious thread weaving tighter with every tentative word, every shared glance. I am learning to use my voice here, Vespera said, her tone laced with quiet power. In the monastery, I was still the invisible one, tending gardens and copying texts while the world forgot me. But in your dreams I am seen, I am heard, and that changes everything. He smiled, then a small fragile thing that transformed his face from burdened king to man seeking forgiveness, the regret in his eyes mixing with a deepening admiration that felt like the first true step towards something earned. Stay a while longer, he asked, his voice soft with longing. Let me listen to the woman I silenced. Let me learn from the power you have awakened. They walked together then through the glowing chambers, the dream unfolding in cinematic sweeps of light and shadow as Vespera shared fragments of her monastery life, the quiet routines, the fear that had kept her silent, and the gift that had set her free. He listened with rapt attention, his inner world shifting around them, the architecture of regret softening into pathways of understanding, the towers no longer crumbling, but rising taller with renewed purpose. Yet as the conversation deepened, the bond flaring with warmth that promised more than words, a distant rumble echoed through the dream, the political shadows from the waking world creeping closer once more. Vespera felt at first the mini cliffhanger of impending conflict, a messenger's urgent news bleeding into his mind, whispers of rebellion tied to the broken bond, threatening to shatter the fragile peace they had begun to build. His hand tightened around hers, the touch more real than any waking moment, and Vespera knew in that heart-stopping instant that their slow-burn connection had ignited something unstoppable, a force that could heal the kingdom or force them both to face the gathering storm before their threads of trust were fully woven. The monastery bell tolled, a low mournful note that echoed across the misty cliffs, pulling her from the lingering warmth of the dream chamber, where Thorne's hand had just brewed Vespera hers like a fragile promise woven from starlight and unspoken regret. Vespera sat up on the narrow cot, her heart still racing from the delicate connection they had begun to build, yet a sharper urgency now gripped her chest like invisible claws forged from the gathering storm. The air in the cell felt heavier, charged with distant thunder, as if the political winds tearing through the kingdom had climbed the remote peaks to find her here. Vespera rose quickly, gray robes whispering around her ankles, and moved to the small window overlooking the valley where the palace spires gleamed like distant accusations beneath swollen clouds heavy with threat. Whispers had reached the monastery overnight, carried by a lone traveler seeking Vespera, a merchant whose voice trembled as he recounted the news to Mother Superior in the quiet dining hall. Armies from the rival houses of Elder and Vesper were mobilizing at the borders, their banners raised high with bold declarations that the Alpha King's public rejection of his fated Omega had cracked the very foundation of the throne. They claimed the broken bond stood as undeniable proof of divine displeasure, a curse upon the realm that proved Thorne's rule unstable and unfit, inviting any ambitious Alpha to seize the crown by force. Vespera pressed her forehead against the cool stone frame, her inner thoughts swirling like the restless mist outside. They twist my humiliation into their battle standard, Vespera realized the empowering fire of her Journey from invisible shadow to awakened voice, now being tested against the brutal gales of kingdom politics. I fled to these walls to vanish into silence, yet my pain has become the very flame they fan into. Open rebellion that could consume the entire realm. The bond pulsed in response, a sharp, insistent tug that pulled her gaze toward the horizon where dark clouds rolled like war drums, beating out the rhythm of coming chaos. Vespera slipped back to her cot, knowing sleep would open the dream door once more, and this time the landscape would reveal the full, terrifying scope of the threat. The velvet darkness claimed her swiftly, the mist parting to reveal a vast war room inside Thorne's sleeping mind, the walls now reinforced with iron and flickering torchlight that cast long, menacing shadows across maps spread across a massive oak table. Vespera stepped forward, her bare feet meeting cold stone, the cinematic sweep of the chamber unfolding with terrifying clarity, banners of Elder and Vesper pinned aggressively along the borders, glowing blood red with hostile intent. Thorne stood at the head of the table, his broad shoulders tense beneath a simple tunic, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and resolve. The regret Vespera had witnessed earlier now sharpened into something fiercer and more determined. "He does not see me yet," Vespera thought, her inner voice steady with quiet strength born from every night Vespera had walked his dreams. "But I am here, walking through the storm they created from our shattered bond. I will not remain the silent cause of this chaos. I will become the unseen force that helps turn the tide before the kingdom burns." The dream air carried the metallic scent of impending battle, mingled with the heavy incense of royal strategy sessions, and Vespera moved closer, circling the table where generals argued in who Vespera d urgent tones. "The rival houses are exploiting the ceremony," they declared, one grizzled commander jabbing a finger at a glowing marker. "They say a king who discards his goddess chosen mate cannot command true loyalty, that the Omegas. Public humiliation proves weakness at the very core of the throne. Whispers spread like poison through the villages that the bond's fracture invites famine, plague, and unrest." Thorne's fists clenched on the table, his voice low and commanding, yet laced with the raw edge of remorse Vespera had come to recognize in every shared dream. "I will not let their lies fracture the kingdom further. The bond was mine to protect, and I failed it in front of the world. But I will not fail the people who look to me for strength." Vespera felt his words resonate through the bond, warming her from within, the slow burn of their reconnection now entangled with the high stakes of external conflict that threatened to tear everything apart. Emotional dialogue formed in her mind, words Vespera longed to speak aloud to him in this moment of crisis. "Your mistake has become their banner, my king, but my voice, the one you once silenced, is still here, walking these maps with you. Together we can rewrite the narrative they weave from my pain into a story of unity and power." The landscape trembled, then the maps fluttering as if caught in an invisible gale, and new shadows crept along the walls, manifesting as spectral figures of enemy scouts infiltrating villages, spreading tales of the rejected Omega, now hidden in a monastery, a symbol of royal frailty that must be exploited before the crown could recover. Vespera watched in cinematic horror as the dream revealed riders on swift horses carrying forged proclamations that called for Thorne's abdication, naming the broken bond as the ultimate proof of unfit rule. Villages were already stirring, some peasants murmuring that an Omega cast aside deserved justice, while others feared the coming war would ravage their homes and leave nothing but ash. The political storm was no longer distant, it roared at the gates, fueled by the very humiliation Vespera had endured, and now threatened to topple everything before their fragile connection could fully bloom into the redemption they both craved. Thorne turned suddenly, as if sensing her presence, his eyes scanning the chamber with desperate intensity. Vespera stepped closer, her hand hovering near his arm, the bond singing with shared urgency. "I am here," Vespera whispered, the words slipping out, carried on the dream wind, soft yet powerful. Enough to ripple across the war table, steadying the flickering markers. His head snapped toward the sound, recognition flashing across his face the same way it had in the nightmare, but this time laced with fierce gratitude and deepening regret. "You see what they have built from my betrayal," he said aloud, his voice breaking with emotion. "The Alpha King allowing vulnerability in this hidden realm. They weaponize your silence, my queen, turning the kingdom against itself, while I fight to hold the line." Vespera met his gaze across the glowing map, her inner thoughts blazing with empowerment. "I was invisible once, Pu Vespera D, aside and forgotten, but this gift lets me stand beside you, unseen yet vital. We will face this storm together, not as king and discarded mate, but as two souls bound by fate and choice." The bond flared brighter, illuminating the chamber in a soft golden light that Pu Vespera D back the encroaching shadows, yet outside the dream the real world stirred with fresh danger. A distant rumble echoed through the monastery walls, the sound of approaching horses carrying urgent news from the capital, a messenger sent by Thorne himself, racing through the mountains to find her before the rival armies could strike. Vespera felt the mini cliffhanger tighten around her heart, the political conflict now bleeding from dream into waking life, forcing a decision that could either unite them against the threat or tear their slow-burn reconnection apart forever, as the kingdom teetered on the brink of open rebellion. The monastery bell tolled a low, mournful note that echoed across the misty cliffs, pulling her from the lingering warmth of the dream chamber, where Thorne's hand had just brewed Vespera D, hers like a promise not yet spoken aloud. Vespera sat up on the narrow cot, her heart still racing from the fragile connection they had begun to weave, yet a new urgency gripped her chest, sharper than any bond had ever felt before. The air in the cell felt heavier, charged with distant thunder, as if the political storm brewing in the kingdom had reached even these remote peaks. Vespera rose quickly, gray robes whispering around her ankles, and moved to the small window overlooking the valley where the palace spires gleamed like distant accusations under gathering clouds. Whispers had reached the monastery overnight, carried by a lone traveler seeking Vespera Tur, a merchant whose voice trembled as he spoke to Mother Superior in the dining hall. Armies from the rival houses of Elder and Vesper were mobilizing at the borders, their banners raised high with declarations that the Alpha King's public rejection of his fated Omega had weakened the throne itself. They claimed the broken bond was proof of divine displeasure, a sign that Thorne's rule was cursed, and unstable, inviting any strong Alpha to challenge him for the crown. Vespera pressed her forehead against the cool stone frame, her inner thoughts swirling like the mist outside. They use my humiliation as their weapon. Vespera realized the empowering fire of her journey from invisible to voice, now tested against the harsh winds of kingdom politics. I fled to these walls to disappear, yet my pain has become the very spark that could set the realm ablaze. The bond pulsed in response, a sharp, insistent tug that drew her gaze toward the horizon, where dark clouds rolled like war drums. Vespera slipped back to her cot, knowing sleep would open the dream door once more, and this time the landscape might reveal the full scope of the threat. The velvet darkness claimed her swiftly, the mist parting to reveal a vast war room inside Thorne's sleeping mind, the walls now reinforced with iron and flickering torchlight that cast long shadows across maps spread across a massive table. Vespera stepped forward, her bare feet meeting cold stone, the cinematic sweep of the chamber unfolding with terrifying clarity, banners of Elder and Vesper pinned aggressively along the borders, glowing red with hostile intent. Thorne stood at the head of the table, his broad shoulders tense beneath a simple tunic, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and resolve. The regret Vespera had witnessed earlier now sharpened into something fiercer. "He does not see me yet," Vespera thought, her inner voice steady with quiet strength. But I am here walking through the storm they created from our shattered bond. I will not remain the silent cause of this chaos. I will become the unseen force that helps turn the tide. The dream air carried the metallic scent of impending battle mingled with the heavy incense of royal. Strategy sessions in Vespera moved closer, circling the table where generals argued in Vespera urgent tones. The rival houses are exploiting the ceremony, they declared, one grizzled commander jabbing a finger at a glowing marker. They say a king who discards his goddess-chosen mate cannot hold loyalty, that the Omega's public. Humiliation proves weakness at the core of the throne. Whispers spread through the villages that the bond's fracture invites disaster, famine, plague, unrest. Thorne's fists clenched on the table, his voice low and commanding, yet laced with the raw edge of remorse Vespera had come to recognize. I will not let their lies fracture the kingdom further. The bond was mine to protect, and I failed it in front of the world. But I will not fail the people who look to me for strength. Vespera felt his words resonate through the bond, warming her from within the slow burn of their reconnection, now entangled with the high stakes of external conflict. Emotional dialogue formed in her mind, words Vespera longed to speak aloud to him in this moment of crisis. Your mistake has become their banner, my king, but my voice, the one you silenced, is still here walking these maps with you. Together we can rewrite the narrative they weave from my pain. The landscape trembled, then the maps fluttering, as if caught in an invisible gale, and new shadows crept along the walls, manifesting as spectral figures of enemy scouts infiltrating villages. Spreading tales of the rejected Omega, now hidden in a monastery, a symbol of royal frailty that must be exploited before the crown could recover. Vespera watched in cinematic horror as the dream revealed riders on swift horses carrying forged proclamations that called for Thorne's abdication, naming the broken bond as the ultimate proof of unfit rule. Villages were already stirring, some peasants murmuring that an Omega cast aside deserved justice, while others feared the coming war would ravage their homes. The political storm was no longer distant, it roared at the gates, fueled by the very humiliation Vespera had endured, and now threatened to topple everything before their fragile connection could fully bloom. Thorne turned suddenly, as if sensing her presence, his eyes scanning the chamber with desperate intensity. Vespera stepped closer, her hand hovering near his arm, the bond singing with shared urgency. I am here, Vespera whispered, the words slipping out, carried on the dream wind, soft yet powerful, enough to ripple across the war table, steadying the flickering markers. His head snapped toward the sound, recognition flashing across his face the same way it had in the nightmare, but this time laced with fierce gratitude and deepening regret. You see what they have built from my betrayal, he said aloud, his voice breaking with emotion. The Alpha King allowing vulnerability in this hidden realm. They weaponize your silence, my queen, turning the kingdom against itself, while I fight to hold the line. Vespera met his gaze across the glowing map, her inner thoughts blazing with empowerment. I was invisible once, Vespera aside and forgotten, but this gift lets me stand beside you, unseen yet vital. We will face this storm together, not as king and discarded mate, but as two souls bound by fate and choice. The bond flared brighter, illuminating the chamber in a soft golden light that Vespera back the encroaching shadows, yet outside the dream the real world stirred with fresh danger. A distant rumble echoed through the monastery walls, the sound of approaching horses carrying urgent news from the capital, a messenger sent by Thorne himself, racing through the mountains to find her before the rival armies could strike. Vespera felt the mini cliffhanger tighten around her heart, the political conflict now bleeding from dream into waking life, forcing a decision that could either unite them against the threat or tear their slow burn reconnection apart forever, as the kingdom teetered on the brink of open rebellion. The sacred grove stood as a living cathedral of ancient trees arching overhead, their leaves shimmering with dew that caught the light like scattered diamonds across the misty cliffs. Vespera walked the winding path, her bare feet sinking into soft moss, the gray robes of the monastery, flowing around her like a second skin that carried the weight of every silent night Vespera had spent in these mountains. The bond in her chest hummed with a gentle yet insistent pull, reminding her that Thorne the Alpha King was riding hard through the passes, his army following like a river of steel and resolve. "This is the moment I have been preparing for," Vespera thought, her inner voice rising like the dawn, itself filled with the empowering fire that had transformed her from the humiliated Omega who fled. The grand ceremony into the dream walker, who now stood ready to merge her hidden gift with the waking world. "I will not let the rival houses use my past pain as their banner of war. Today the ritual will awaken the full power within me and give voice to every silenced heart in the kingdom." Mother Superior waited at the center of the clearing beside the low obsidian altar, her silver streaked hair glowing in the soft light as Vespera held the ancient silver chalice filled with moonlit water from the mountain spring. "Child, the goddess has guided you here," the elder said, her voice warm and steady with faith. "Drink from this chalice and let the veil between dreams and reality thin so your gift may bloom fully in the light of day, where no crown can ever dim its radiance again." Vespera took the chalice, her fingers brushing the cool metal, sending a shiver of anticipation through her body as Vespera lifted it to her lips and drank deeply, the liquid tasting of starlight and fresh rain and ancient power that spread through her veins like liquid fire, awakening every part of her soul. The nuns formed a solemn circle around the altar, their soft chants rising like mist weaving through the air and making the standing stones around the grove glow faintly with inner light, as if the earth itself recognized the sacred high stakes of this moment. Vespera knelt before the altar, her knees pressing into the cool moss, the gray robes pooling around her like clouds ready to part and reveal the light Vespera had carried in secret. Inside her the gift stirred vividly, the dream landscapes Vespera had walked night after night, now blending seamlessly with the waking grove, the towering columns of light rising in her mind, not crumbling with regret, but standing strong, etched with images of her own face, radiant and heard. The air grew thick with energy, the high stakes pressing against her heart as Vespera sensed the enemy riders approaching the ridge, their banners a dark reminder of the political storm fueled by her past pain. Yet Vespera remained steady, the inner thoughts swirling with cinematic beauty, the transformation beginning as soft flames of light danced along her skin, harmless yet alive, wrapping her in a cloak of power that made the trees whisper in response. The bond connected her to Thorne stronger, now his presence a steady anchor as he rode closer, the Alpha King feeling her awakening like a beacon calling him home. "I am preparing to embrace it all," Vespera reflected, the journey from invisible to powerful, now cresting like dawn after the longest night. "No longer will I hide in sleep or shadows. Today the ritual awakens the gift fully, and the world will see the voice they tried to silence rise like the sun over these mountains." The chants swelled the veil, thinning dramatically, the air crackling with energy as visions of equality in voice flooded her mind halls, where Omegas spoke in council rooms filled with light. Towers of justice rising where regret once crumbled. Vespera felt the power settle deeper, the gift no longer hidden in sleep, but anchored fully in the waking world, allowing her to walk the landscapes of minds, even while standing in the harsh light of day. The bond sang with triumph, connecting her to Thorne, who crested the ridge, at last his army pouring behind him like a river of steel, and resolve, his eyes locking onto her across the distance, filled with awe and a love earned through every fragile thread they had woven. "My queen," he called, his voice carrying on the wind raw with emotion, the Alpha King witnessing the woman he had betrayed now transformed into the force that could save them both. Yet the high stakes tightened as the enemy leader broke free from the visions spurring his mount. Directly toward her, the sword glinting with deadly intent, the ritual's first wave leaving her. Momentarily exposed, the light still building as the final surge of transformation coursed through her veins. Vespera held her ground, the light around her flickering like a candle in a storm, knowing that one more breath, one more surge of will would complete the awakening fully, but the blade was closing in fast, and the kingdom's fate balanced on the edge of this single moment where her power could either shield the monastery or falter before the eyes of the man who had once turned away, leaving her to rise or fall alone in the fire Vespera had kindled from her own silenced heart. The sacred grove erupted in a symphony of light and flame as the moonlit water from the chalice ignited within her veins, turning the quiet hum of the ritual into a roaring crescendo that shook the ancient standing stones. Vespera remained kneeling at the obsidian altar, her gray robes glowing with inner fire, the fabric lifting as if caught in an unseen wind, while the nuns chanted louder, their voices weaving through the air like threads of destiny, pulling the veil between worlds to its breaking point. The bond surged hotter than ever, connecting her to Thorne, who Vespera felt thundering closer on the mountain road, his presence a steady anchor amid the chaos, yet the enemy riders crested the final ridge, their war cries slicing through the dawn. This is the flame, Vespera thought, her inner voice blazing with the empowering force of every silent year. I am no longer the shadow fleeing into the night. The gift awakens fully, and with it the voice that will reshape the kingdom from the Vespera S of my pain. The transformation crested dramatically the air around her, igniting in pillars of ethereal fire that rose toward the sky, illuminating the grove in waves of gold and crimson, each flame carrying visions of her journey, the monastery shadows, the dream corridors, the public humiliation, now transmuted into power that pulsed outward like a heartbeat across the cliffs. The standing stones cracked open with soft bursts of light, revealing carvings that glowed with her face as a queen radiant, and heard her eyes reflecting the strength Vespera had claimed night after night. Vespera rose slowly, the flames dancing along her arms, wrapping her in a cloak of living light that made the ground tremble beneath her bare feet. The enemy leader spurred his horse forward, sword raised high, his face twisted with rage at the sight of the Omega they had come to seize, now blazing like a beacon. You dare manifest this sorcery, he bellowed, the words carrying on the wind as his riders charged the final stretch, their banners, snapping with chains, crossed over her name. Yet Vespera extended her hands, the ritual's energy pouring from her palms in a sweeping arc that met the advancing force like a wall of dream made real. Visions flooded their minds through the bond Vespera channeled, halls of equality where Omegas spoke. In council rooms filled with light, towers of justice rising where regret once crumbled. The horses reared in terror, the riders clutching their heads as her whisper echoed inside their thoughts, not for revenge, but for truth. The bond you mock is unbreakable, Vespera sent the emotional dialogue rippling outward, soft, yet carrying the weight of stars. I was silenced, once cast aside in the grand hall, but this flame is my voice, and it will not be extinguished, Vespera D, by your lies. The blaze intensified, the flames merging into a single towering pillar that lit the entire valley, drawing the eyes of every soul within sight, the nuns falling to their knees in awe. Vespera felt the power settle deep within her bones, the gift no longer hidden in sleep, but anchored fully in the waking world, allowing her to walk the landscapes of minds, even while standing in the harsh light of day. The bond sang with triumph, connecting her to Thorne, who crested the ridge, at last his army pouring behind him like a river of steel, and resolve, his eyes locking onto her across the distance, filled with awe and a love earned through every fragile thread they had woven. My queen, he called, his voice carrying on the wind raw with emotion, the Alpha King witnessing the woman he had betrayed, now transformed into the force that could save them both. Yet the high stakes tightened as the enemy leader broke free from the visions spurring his mount. Directly toward her, the sword glinting with deadly intent, the ritual's climax, leaving her. Momentarily exposed, the flames still settling as the final wave of transformation coursed through her veins. Vespera held her ground, the light around her flickering like a candle in a storm, knowing that one more breath, one more surge of will would complete the awakening fully, but the blade was closing in fast, and the kingdom's fate balanced on the edge of this single moment where her power could either shield the monastery or falter before the eyes of the man who had once turned away, leaving her to rise or fall alone in the fire Vespera had kindled from her own silenced heart. The grand halls of the royal palace gleamed under the light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers there, facets catching the morning sun and casting rainbows across the sea of nobles who had gathered for what they believed would be another day of courtly displays and political maneuvering. Vespera stood at the center of the dais, her form still glowing with the residual light of the ritual that had awakened her gift fully, the gray monastery robes replaced by a simple yet radiant gown of soft white that shimmered like dream mist in the light. The bond in her chest sang strong and steady, connecting her to Thorne, who stood beside her, his tall frame tense with a mix of awe and deep regret as the court fell into stunned silence at the sight of the Omega they had once watched flee in humiliation, now returning as a force of light and power. This is the moment, Vespera thought, her inner voice rising like a tide of quiet strength, the culmination of my journey from the invisible shadow cast aside in this very hall to the woman who now stands with voice and power that no crown can silence. I will confront them all about the betrayal and show them the gift that turned my pain into the light that can save the kingdom. The nobles whispered among themselves, their eyes wide with shock and curiosity, the rival houses representatives standing stiffly at the edges, their faces pale as they realized the woman they had tried to use as a symbol of weakness now radiated undeniable strength. Vespera lifted her chin, her eyes meeting Thorne's for a brief moment, the emotional connection between them deepening in front of the entire court, the slow burn romance flaring in the public eye for the first time. Your Majesty, Vespera began, her voice soft, yet carrying through the hall like a gentle wind through ancient trees laced with the empowering truth Vespera had discovered in the monastery and the dreams. You publicly named another as your queen while our fated bond still sang between us. You humiliated me before the kingdom, turning me into the invisible Omega who fled into the night. But that betrayal did not break me. It awakened something greater, a gift that allows me to walk inside dreams like living landscapes, to see the regret you built into rooms of my face and closed doors you could not open. The court gasped as one, the cinematic imagery of her words painting the air with visions that flickered briefly in the minds of those present, halls of regret, towers of guilt that mirrored the architecture Vespera had walked in Thorne's sleeping mind. Thorne stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion, the Alpha King allowing the court to witness his vulnerability. I was wrong, my true queen, he said, the words echoing with raw honesty. I chose politics over the bond one turned from you in this very hall for alliances that now crumble under the weight of my mistake. I see you now not as the shadow I discarded, but as the light that has walked through my darkest dreams and pulled me back from the abyss. Vespera turned to the court, her hands extending slightly, the power of her gift manifesting in soft ripples of light that while Vespera D over the nobles, showing them brief flaw Vespera S of the political storm, the rival armies, the visions Vespera had planted to sow doubt and unity. I stand before you today not as the rejected Omega, but as the dream walker whose voice will no longer be silenced. The rival houses used my humiliation as their banner of war, claiming the broken bond proves the king weak. But I have walked their minds and yours, and I see the truth. The bond is not broken, it is stronger, because it was tested in fire and silence. The empowering journey from oppressed to powerful filled her with warmth as Vespera continued her emotional dialogue reaching every ear in the hall. I forgive the betrayal not because it was small, but because I have grown beyond it. I have found my voice in the shadows of the monastery and in the architecture of dreams, and now I use it to call for change. No longer will omegas be invisible. No longer will fated bonds be discarded for political gain. The court murmured in a mix of awe and unease, some nobles shifting uncomfortably as the light from her gift touched their thoughts, revealing their own hidden regrets and the potential for a kingdom where every voice mattered. Thorne stood beside her, his hand brushing hers in a quiet gesture of support, the bond flaring brighter as he spoke again, turning to the assembled nobles. Let this day mark the beginning of a new era, where the goddess chosen are honored, not cast aside. Vespera felt the power settle deeper, within her the cinematic beauty of the hall, now transformed by her presence, the chandeliers seeming to shine brighter, as if the very palace recognized the shift. Yet as the words hung in the air, a ripple of tension spread through the rival house delegates, one of them stepping forward, his voice cutting through the moment with sharp accusation. You speak of power and forgiveness, yet you stand here with a gift that could be used to control us all. How do we know this is not another trick to seize the throne? The question hung heavy, the court holding its breath as Vespera met the challenger's gaze, her inner strength flaring like the ritual flames once more. The confrontation had reached its peak, the public truth laid bare before the kingdom, and Vespera knew in that heart-stopping instant that her next words could either seal the redemption they both craved or ignite the final spark of rebellion that still smoldered in the shadows, waiting to test whether the voice Vespera had claimed could truly change the world, or if the old powers would rise once more to silence her forever. The grand halls of the royal palace now pulsed with a different kind of light, the crystal chandeliers catching the afternoon sun and scattering it across the assembled nobles like stars falling into a new constellation of hope. Vespera stood on the raised dais beside Thorne, her white gown shimmering with the residual glow of the ritual that had awakened her gift fully, the bond between them singing openly for the first time in front of the entire court. The air felt alive with possibility, the same hall that had once witnessed her public humiliation now transformed into the stage of her ascension, the invisible Omega finally stepping into the light Vespera had earned through dreams and silence. This is the moment, Vespera thought, her inner voice swelling with empowering warmth, the journey from the monastery shadows and the architecture of his regret to this dais where I am seen and heard at last. I am no longer the shadow they discarded. Today I become queen, not by crown alone, but by the voice I have claimed and the power that walks between worlds. Thorne turned to her, his tall frame steady, yet his eyes soft with the deep regret and growing love that had bloomed slowly through every shared dream, his hand reaching for hers in full view of the court, the touch sending a warm current through the bond that made the chandeliers glow brighter. Before the assembled nobles and the representatives of every house, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a king who had learned the cost of pride. Let this day mark the restoration of what was broken. I publicly wronged my fated mate in this very hall, choosing politics over the bond the goddess herself had given us. Today I correct that mistake with all my heart. He lifted the ancient crown of the true queen, the one that had waited in the vaults untouched since the ceremony, and placed it gently upon her head, the metal warm against her brow, as if it had always belonged to her. The court erupted in a wave of applause, some faces still stunned, others shining with genuine hope as the bond flared visibly between them, a soft golden thread of light that connected their hearts for all to see. Vespera felt the power settle into her bones, the cinematic beauty of the moment unfolding like dawn. After the longest night, the nobles bowing as one, while the rival houses' representatives lowered their heads in reluctant acceptance. Her voice rose then, soft yet carrying through the hall like a gentle wind through ancient trees. laced with the emotional strength Vespera had discovered in the sacred grove. I accept this crown not as a prize, but as a promise. The gift that once let me walk only in dreams now anchors me here in the waking world where I will use it to build a kingdom where no one is invisible. Vespera extended her hands, the gift manifesting in soft ripples of light that wa Vespera di over the court, showing brief visions of the new laws Vespera would enact, halls where omegas spoke freely in. Council rooms filled with equal voices, towers of justice rising where regret once crumbled. With the authority now granted to her as Queen, Vespera declared the first changes, her words carrying the empowering fire of every silenced heart Vespera had once represented. From this day forward no fated bond shall be discarded for political gain. Omegas will hold seats in the royal council, their voices equal to any alpha or beta. The monasteries that once offered only vesperal tour will become academies where hidden gifts are nurtured and celebrated, not hidden in shame. Marriages will be chosen by the heart, not by alliance alone, and every subject, regardless of designation, will have the right to speak their truth before the throne without fear of humiliation or erasure. The court murmured in awesome, nobles nodding with approval, while others shifted uncomfortably, yet the light from her gift touched their thoughts, revealing the beauty of a realm where chosen family mattered more than bloodline, and power belonged to the powerless who dared to rise. Thorne stood beside her, his hands still entwined with hers, the Alpha King's inner transformation complete as he added his voice in support. These laws will be written into the kingdom's charter today and enforced with my full authority. The woman I once betrayed has become the light that redeems us all. Vespera felt the slow burn of their romance deepen in that public moment, the bond humming with a warmth that promised more than forgiveness, a future earned through every fragile thread they had woven across dreams and mountains. The cinematic sweep of the hall now reflected her journey, the same dais where Vespera had once fled. Now the place where Vespera stood tall, changing laws that would echo through generations, empowering omegas across the realm to find their own voices and hidden gifts. Yet as the applause swelled and the new council members were called forward to swear their oaths, a shadow flickered at the edge of her awareness, the bond tugging with a sudden warning. One of the rival house lords stepped forward, his face carefully composed but his eyes burning with unresolved anger, the political conflict not yet fully extinguished. Vespera d. He bowed low, but his voice carried a veiled challenge as he spoke. Your Majesty, these changes are bold and noble, yet some houses still question whether a dream walker's power can truly bind a fractured kingdom, or if it invites new dangers we cannot yet see. The words hung in the air like a hidden blade, the court falling silent once more as Vespera met his gaze, her inner strength flaring like the ritual flames, the mini cliffhanger tightening around her heart. The laws had been changed, the crown placed upon her head, and Vespera had become the powerful queen. The kingdom needed but the final test of her voice, and her bond with Thorne now loomed in the shadows of lingering opposition, threatening to challenge everything they had rebuilt before the legacy could fully take root. The grand council chamber of the royal palace hummed with a new energy, the tall arched windows letting in streams of golden afternoon light that danced across the long oak table where the newly formed equal council now sat for the first time. Vespera occupied the queen's seat at the head, her white gown still carrying the faint shimmer of the ritual light, the crown resting lightly upon her brow like a promise fulfilled rather than a weight imposed. Thorne sat beside her, his hand resting openly on the table, near hers, the bond between them a steady, warm current that everyone in the room could almost see, the slow burn of their reconnection, now visible in every shared glance and quiet touch. This is where my voice becomes law, Vespera thought, her inner voice swelling with the empowering fire that had carried her from the monastery shadows through dreams of regret and into this chamber where the powerless finally held the pen that rewrote history. I once fled this palace as the invisible Omega. Now I sit here changing the very foundations, so no one else will ever have to hide their gift or their heart. The council members, a balanced mix of alphas, betas, and omegas from every house, leaned forward with a mixture of awe and determination, parchment and quills ready as Vespera began to speak her words soft, yet carrying the emotional weight of every silent story Vespera had witnessed in dreams and in the quiet routines of the monastery. Today we rewrite the laws of this kingdom, Vespera declared, her voice echoing gently through the vaulted space like a gentle wind through ancient trees. No longer will fated bonds be discarded for political gain. Every Omega shall have the right to refuse any arranged match, and the bond will be honored as sacred above all alliances. The scribe's quills scratched across the parchment the cinematic imagery of the moment unfolding as sunlight caught the ink, making each new law gleam like threads of starlight being woven into the kingdom's future. Vespera continued, her inner thoughts blazing with quiet strength, the journey from humiliation to this table, filling her with a warmth that Vespera d back every shadow of the past. Omegas will hold half the seats in every regional council, their voices equal in matters of justice, trade, and defense. Monasteries will become academies open to all, where hidden gifts like dream walking are taught and celebrated, not feared or hidden in shame. Children born of any designation will be raised with the same opportunities regardless of the scent of their future bond, and no alpha may claim ownership over an Omega's future without mutual consent witnessed by the council. Thorne nodded, his eyes filled with deep admiration and the regret that had once built closed doors, now transformed into proud support as he added his royal seal to each decree. These changes come from the heart of the woman I once betrayed, he said, his voice rough with earned emotion, the Alpha King allowing the council to witness his full redemption. Vespera has shown me that true power rises from the powerless, and I stand with her completely. The bond flared brighter between them, a soft golden thread visible for a moment in the air, the slow burn romance deepening in the public light as Vespera reached for his hand, the touch sending ripples of hope through the entire chamber. Vespera felt the empowering surge as the new laws took shape on the scrolls, the cinematic beauty of the scene reflecting her long journey, the same palace that had once reduced her to silence now echoing with the words that would protect countless others from the same fate. Yet Vespera Vespera d further, her gift manifesting in gentle waves of light that touched each council member's mind, showing them visions of the future academy halls filled with young Omegas, learning to walk dreams without fear, equal courts where voices once silenced now shaped policy, and sanctuaries where chosen family mattered more than bloodline. The laws will be proclaimed across every village by sunset, Vespera declared, her emotional dialogue reaching every heart in the room. No more public ceremonies that break bonds for crowns. No more invisible lives lived in fear. From this day the kingdom belongs to all of us, and the goddesses chosen will never again be cast aside. The council rose as one, bowing not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect, the rival house representatives among them lowering their heads in acceptance as the weight of the new charter settled over the realm like a protective cloak. Vespera stood then, her gown catching the light like living mist, the power of her gift now fully integrated with her queenship, allowing her to sense the kingdom's heartbeat through the bond, the changes already rippling outward like stones cast into a still lake. Thorne rose with her, drawing her close in front of the council, his arm around her waist, the gesture tender and public, the man who had once turned away, now choosing her openly with every breath. You have given us all a new dawn, my queen, he murmured, his voice for her ears alone, yet carrying the warmth that made the bond sing louder. Vespera smiled softly, her inner thoughts filled with the poetic beauty of transformation, the invisible one now the queen who rewrote the world with light instead of force. Yet as the council began to file out carrying the freshly sealed scrolls to be proclaimed a feint, shadow flickered at the edge of her awareness, the bond tugging with a subtle warning from a distant corner of the realm where one old house still whispered of resistance. The laws had been changed, the equality enacted, and her voice had reshaped the kingdom, but the final echoes of opposition lingered like a hidden crack in the foundation, threatening to test whether the new order Vespera had built could truly stand, or if one last challenge would rise before the legacy could bloom fully into the bright future Vespera had dreamed of in the architecture of his once regretful mind. The years unfolded like petals opening under a gentle sun, the kingdom transforming in ways that once lived only in dreams and whispered hopes. Vespera walked the sunlit halls of the newly built academy nestled against the whispering mountains, where the old monastery had stood. Its stone walls now expanded into light-filled classrooms and gardens where young Omegas learned to explore their hidden gifts without fear or shame. Children laughed in the courtyards, their voices carrying on the breeze as they practiced walking through practiced dreams under careful guidance, the air filled with the scent of blooming lavender and fresh parchment. Vespera paused at the wide balcony overlooking the valley, her white queen's gown flowing softly in, the wind, the crown resting lightly upon her brow like a natural extension of her own light. This is the legacy we built, Vespera thought, her inner voice warm with the empowering joy of a journey completed. The invisible Omega, who once fled in rain and humiliation, now standing as the queen who opened doors for every silenced heart. The Equal Council meets today in the palace, their voices shaping policies that protect bonds and nurture gifts, ensuring no one is ever cast aside again. Thorne joined her on the balcony, his arms slipping around her waist, the bond between them a steady golden melody that had grown deeper with time, the slow burn romance, now a quiet fire that warmed every shared moment. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice soft with the love earned through regret and redemption. Look what you have created, my queen, he murmured, the Alpha King's eyes filled with pride as he gazed at the academy below. Sanctuaries like this one rise in every province, chosen family, replacing bloodlines that once divided us. You gave them voice, and I stand beside you forever. Vespera leaned into him, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their air stirred with the promise of a new generation, the child who would inherit a kingdom where Omegas were powerful and bonds were Sherry. Vespera D. The cinematic beauty of the moment unfolded around them, the mountains glowing in the late afternoon light, the academy spires catching the sun like beacons of hope, while distant bells rang out the proclamation of the new laws being read in every village square. Equal councils now sat in every region, their decisions balancing Alpha strength with Omega wisdom, creating a realm where power belonged to the powerless who dared to rise. Vespera remembered the long nights in the monastery, the closed doors in his dreams, the public confrontation, and the ritual flames that had awakened her fully, all of it leading to this bright future where children ran freely through gardens of possibility. A small group of students approached her, then their eyes wide with wonder as they bowed not out of fear but respect. Queen, the eldest girl said, her voice steady with the confidence the academy had taught her. We walked through a shared dream today and saw the old ceremony transformed into one of unity. Thank you for showing us that silence can become song. Vespera smiled, reaching out to touch the girl's shoulder, the gift within her now shared freely, allowing brief glimpses of light and hope to pass between them. You are the future, Vespera replied, her emotional dialogue carrying the poetic weight of every step Vespera had taken. Walk boldly in your dreams and in the waking world, for the kingdom belongs to all of us now. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Vespera stood with Thorne on the balcony, watching the academy lights flicker on one by one like stars brought down to earth. The Equal Council had passed the final charter that morning, ensuring sanctuaries would be funded across the realm, and no bond would ever be broken for politics again. Their heir would grow up in a world where chosen family mattered more than bloodlines, where voice was given to the voiceless and power lifted the powerless to thrones of their own. Vespera felt the bond hum with complete peace. The man who had once betrayed her, now her greatest partner, the regret that built towers in his mind, now transformed into the foundation of their shared legacy. The bright future stretched before them, endless and full of light, the kingdom thriving under laws that honored every heart. Her story had come to an end, but our journey together continues. If you found this story inspiring and meaningful, please like the video to support me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next empowering stories. And if you have any thoughts about the characters, her journey, or want to share your own story, please comment below. I really look forward to reading and chatting with you.